You are few, but you are a selected audience interested in cryptography, so you're very welcome. Kindly remember, I'm neither a native speaker nor ingrained in Anglo-Saxon culture, so before taking insult, please ask me if I really meant it. Yeah? I start with an old Russian proverb. The German speakers know this as Kontrolle ist gut, Vertrauen ist gut, Kontrolle is better. But actually that's not what it says. It says rely yet verify. And FX recently in a conference said he can't hear anything about trust anymore. He wants to talk about confidence. And I agree with him that I don't want to hear any more about trust because that is completely misleading. Yeah? Consider one department of developers giving software to another department and asking, well, do you trust us? That's completely irrelevant. We should be talking about reliance and reliability. Reliance means I rely on somebody or something, and I rely that it has specific features or that it's doing things in a specific way. And to rely, the reliability have to be proven, that is to be verified. So that should give a general note for this whole talk or perspective to look at it. I started with IT very, very early in 1979 in a school experiment. Then I continued at the University of Karlsruhe doing studies, research at the European Institute of System Security. Since 1993, I'm a self-employed security consultant, and you see some talks I have given. Yeah. So how did I come to this topic I'm talking about? When I started, IT was something really new. It was cool, but it was not widespread. Yeah? When I started, the official position was no more than 5,000 computer scientists will be needed on the whole world. So, boy, don't study computer science, you will be unemployed. Well, one thing we definitely learn from conferences like this is we will be never unemployed. Yeah? So I often did Gedankenexperiments, intellectual puzzles with IT, and one was concerned with the surroundings. My hometown is Trier, and that is situated between Eifel and Hunsrück, and that is a very lowly populated area. So it's always problematic for pupils to get public transport. The obvious idea is hitchhiking, but hitchhiking was not so good an idea at that time because there have been several incidents. So the question is it possible with this cool new toy to build a support for secured hitchhiking? That would have been the design objectives. Travel should be anonymous, if possible. Normally, it should not be possible to track people. But on the other hand, we need some kind of crime prevention and prosecution. That is, we need registration if a driver and a passenger bond for a transport, and if a person goes missing, these tracks should be opened to support police work. Further things would, of course, be to match travel opportunities and wishes, and the idea was to integrate all this in the public transport system. Consider that was in the time before public key, crypto, before mobile phones. I had a solution, but I won't show you. It would have worked, but nowadays everybody would laugh about this. So one more example. I took part in writing the school administration of the federal state I lived in. It was mostly developed by pupils. Interestingly, I came into the team because I hacked the school computer. Yeah? And I did security for this project. So there's a challenge. How do you prevent anybody later on impeaching the graduation diplomas of the pupil programmers? Because they are part of the project. The solution actually was very simple. Our headmaster, when we were granted the diplomas, stated publicly that he had calculated all the diplomas of the participants by hand, on paper. He did it not because he did not trust us. He did it to prevent impeachment of the graduates. And that is interesting because we see from these simple examples that there are much more security dimensions than only CIA, confidentiality, integrity, availability. We need, in real life, we need multilateral security. That is not some party is the trusted one. Yeah? Believe us, we are the good ones. But each party has interests to defend. And we need much more security dimensions than the classical three. We need a proof of correctness. We need auditability or verifiability. We need separation of duties. Yeah? We need non-repudiation. And what is often overlooked, we need proof of volition versus error. What is a question of human interface design? Then we need privacy, and that has various sub-dimensions. I don't want to delve too deep into this. The original example, what I wanted to present, and which led to the abstract of multiple non-trusting parties, I can't present because it's from a customer, and I made up a new example, a fictitious example, where actually it's more about reliance and reliability. I do this in a form of a soft or social science fiction. That is, the hard science should be the crypto, so correct me if I do anything wrong in the cryptographic aspects. And I'm use only things which are a quarter of a century around. The soft outer shell is a fictional society with various personas and their stances. And I ask suspense of disbelief for this society, as is normal for science fiction. That should give us a sufficiently complex and vivid example. And the example will be telecommunication data retention, and the question if you could do this in a way which balances the privacy and the possibility to do police investigations. So that are our cryptographic instruments. I mostly avoid formulas. And we have private and public key. I think the icons are clear. signed content, encrypted content, you know that this typically would be an hybrid encryption. We have content first signed, then sealed, or content first encrypted, then sealed. You may wonder, why do I avoid the word signature? Well, I think to sign something is a misnomer, because signing is an act of volition, whereas sealing is an act of proving authenticity of origin and content. If a seal should count as an act of volition is a completely different discussion and a completely different dimension, and it was so for hundreds of years. Yeah. So just sealing a question, for example, or speculation does not make it a legalistic act. It proves this question or the speculation comes from me and the content has not changed. And occasionally we'll need to use symmetric keys. You see, this is a symmetric key, that's obvious. And we also can have more complex constructs. For example, that is a content which is encrypted for the keys of Alice and Bob, and it is carrying a seal, but this seal is detached. It's on the content is sealed, but the seal is on the outside. You will see why I need this later. Okay, so that is our fictitious society. Constitutional democracy, politically active, and we have investigated authorities, an examining magistrate, a privacy commissioner, and of course, telecommunication service providers. So that you perhaps understand better this society, a typical motto for this society would be, in a democracy, the majority polices the state and not vice versa. That is the stance of that society. The investigative authorities have an obligation, crime prevention and prosecution. That brings them in the position of conflicting interests, because they can do the one only when touching on fundamental civil rights. They have intentions. During an investigation, they have to keep tactical secrecy. They want to earn and keep public confidence. They want that their work is auditable, and they want to be able to exonerate themselves from false allegations. Yeah? They simply want to be protected against the allegation you are abusing your powers for love int or whatever. Similar is the examining magistrate. He has the obligation in the end to decide within the legal framework where a breach of civil rights is in order. And he has very similar interests and intentions like the investigative services. And then we have a privacy commissioner. He is an independent instance of control provided by the state, and he verifies if what the examining magistrate decides is really within the scope of law. In our society, he has a further role. He owns a private key, which he has to destroy in specific cases to stop all further decoding of telecommunication data. Then we have the telecommunication providers, well, which do the obvious thing and essentially don't want to be involved because they have business to do. But of course, they want to avoid allegations of giving data directly to the investigators, what in turn means that they want to delete data as fast as possible. So, as we are to map social political decisions, we need a very, very flexible framework. And a lot of questions should be answered, but we leave this out for lack of time. So, the first thing we have to decide is what data is to be disclosed to the investigation services, the initial data. The general data structure we have is we have a handle and opaque protected data. And this handle is information freely available to the investigators, and the handle is chosen so that it's not perceived to impair fundamental rights. Then we have opaque data. This is the data pertaining to fundamental rights. And this is only accessible via a procedure we have still to define, but it will be crypto-enforced, have segregation-of-duty, and will allow for review and control. So, the handle. It's a subset of the communication data as selector. I give an example what would be inappropriate. If we had the calling ID and a precise start and end time as one handle, and another data set, the called ID with precise start time and end time, then of course it would be easy to correlate timestamps and to map these two handles and say, well, this was a communication. So we need some kind of dilution of precision to protect against these inference and extrapolation attacks. So for example, we could use calling ID and diluted start time and a diluted duration, or called ID and diluted start time and duration, or for geolocation handles, we would use diluted locations. So what should this be? For example, a diluted start time could be floored to some time interval. And these time intervals could depend on time of day. So, for example, in the middle of the day, it might be rounded to minutes, and in the night, it might be rounded to quarter of hours. Just to ensure that there are always enough data sets within each time frame so that no automatic correlation is possible. Similar things we can do with the duration, and of course we are not bound to do it to the minute. We can shop it into any time duration intervals we want. And a similar approach could be used for the location. So for example, it could be a base station cell, a precinct, geo-coordination rounded example, for example, to the arc minute, whatever. We actually could change it depending on the population density in that area. Again, to guarantee that there are enough records so that no automatic inference is possible. So what is our ominous, opaque, protected data? Well, there's again a decision to make. Should it be completely anonymous or should it be pseudonymous? If we make it pseudonymous, then the investigative services can do some kind of pre-investigation. So for example, they have the calling ID and they have a pseudonym for the called ID. Now they can match up and, for example, select the pseudonyms which are often called and weed out those only called once, or they can select the pseudonyms called in a specific time slot and look who else, for example, called them. The question is if we want to allow this. These pseudonyms are completely visible to the investigators without any interference. Yeah? So it's a question how we scope the pseudonyms. There are many ways to scope pseudonyms. Yeah? We could, for example, make them specific per contact or per contact area. Another dimension we could variate is the durability of pseudonyms. We can change them at intervals. We can say a pseudonym lives for a month, or 6 months, or a day, whatever. It's a decision, a political decision of the society. What it thinks is an adequate balance between protection of the privacy and enabling investigations. One more thing, I don't believe that telecommunication analysis of telecommunication data retention provides much prevention, but of course it helps later to analyze the structures and then to get at other people maybe preparing a second, a third attack, or to analyze the structure of thief organizations or things like that. But normally, a crime will happen and lead you to a starting point of your investigation. And it's very simple to do this decrease in pseudonymity. Here is an example. We have a nonce for the interval of time and specific for the telecommunication provider, including the conversation. And we get the pseudonym by encrypting with a key the nonce of the subscriber. There's an individual nonce of a subscriber. We will see later why. So you have a rough idea how these pseudonyms work. There's more. We can choose who will see a pseudonym. So perhaps pseudonyms are not visible to the investigating services, but only to the examining magistrate. Or they see different kind of pseudonyms. Yeah. So we have a lot of variables where we can tailor the system to what we perceive or what this society perceives as a balance between privacy and investigation capabilities. Each choice has its advantages and disadvantages. I think that slide speaks for itself. The important point is that the framework suggested accommodates the whole continuum. That's not a question of black and white. I avoid this. So I choose one kind of workflow. You will see that many others would be possible. And we make a fundamental decision. The examining magistrate is a gatekeeper of the process. This process will not start if the examining magistrate gives not his or her okay. And then the examining magistrate in parallel can involve the civil NGOs representing the society and the Federal Privacy Commissioner. And in the end, we see some variations what could be done in terms of decision models. Let's start. So the investigative authorities have free access to data sets of this form: a handle, a pseudonym, and some opaque data signed by the telecommunication provider? Well, you now may ask, where has the anonymity gone? Quite simple. That's a pseudonym to null, and you have anonymity. So, they can select the relevant records by handle. Eventually, they can narrow down their selections by pseudonyms and build a disclosure request. And that is a disclosure request. Within this request is a selection of all the data sets they want to disclose. And a lot of other information which is needed to help to process this request. The examining magistrate now decrypts each of these data sets, and here he has his own point of view. He might see information, for example, more significant pseudonyms, but also relevant information about caller or callee, for example, that is a medical doctor or that is a priest, which pertain to the decision by law he has to make. But the investigators don't have access to this information if the examining magistrate is not giving it out, of course. And he gets 3 more opaque data sets. Now, according law, he selects the data sets or records for disclosure. And packs a disclosure decision. And this disclosure decision, you see, is accessible both to the privacy commissioner and to the civil delegates or NGOs. And within this disclosure decision, you see a decision audit record, which is encrypted to the key of the magistrate and has a detached seal. And that will be important later. Okay, he forwards the decision to the other parties. The privacy commissioner decrypts, verifies, and then decrypts each data record which should be disclosed. He again gets independent information about the record. Again, for example, that is a medical doctor or a medical office, to be concise. And perhaps he also have pseudonyms. The point of this is that maybe the investigative services can formulate a kind of narrowing down request in, let's say, SQL or something like this, which would allow the commissioner to automatically narrow down the selection by the pseudonyms he has view of, and only he has view of. Yeah? The decision of the privacy commissioner is purely formal and automated. He maybe gets an algorithmic criteria from the investigators. He verifies his decision relevant infos. And depending on this infos, for example, he triggers specific watch lists. So for example, if information of a medical office has to be disclosed or of a journalist, then this case will later definitely investigated. Besides the, wie nennt man das, Stichprobe, random samples. Yeah? He will do random sample checks, but if a journalist is involved, for example, he will definitely check. And he has watch lists for this. And he might notify specific institutions and things like this. And he also, if he detects that, for example, a specific request is not validate, he has the power to request that the telecommunication provider bumps the subscriber nonce, though the pseudonym changes. Yeah? If he sees there are requests for subscribers which are not allowed, he will always bump the subscriber nonce and the pseudonym changes, though this cannot be further tracked. Then he can extract the keys of the approves record and encrypt them for the magistrate and seal it. Yeah? And of course, he can provide periodic reports for statistics. So the point is that all parties involved so far are bound by law. They have not much freedom to react to circumstances. The examining magistrate has some freedom, but of course, he has a purpose to enable the investigation. So we need some party which is able to react to circumstances. The question is when. That are our delegates of civil society. They do essentially a very similar thing to the privacy commissioner. They have, again, decision-relevant infos, and they have the individual random keys per record. We have a look at what they could do additionally later. For the moment, they are acting very similar to the privacy commissioner, purely formal and automated, to speed up the investigations. But they have own reporting criteria and own times when they report. So they can immediately raise a hand. For example, if you have some whatever gate scandal and suddenly a lot of journalist data should be disclosed, then they can raise public discussion about this. Yeah? Okay, now the examining magistrate has the two keys. They are XORed. Now he can open up the checkered opaque data set, and there he finds all the connection location subscriber data signed by the telecommunication provider. This is forwarded to the investigators, and they, in return, clear innocent bystanders, though that their subscriber nonces could be bumped. Then the examining magistrate checks if the same subscriber is locked by another investigation. If not, he is bumping the subscriber's nonce. So that is the investigation phase. Any questions to the investigation phase? Okay. Then we come to the verification phase. After an investigation is closed, or after some period of time, the civil society or the privacy commissioner can request audit of disclosure decision. And now we see the function of this self-encrypted decision audit record. It has to be decrypted by the examining magistrate, and the detached seal keeps him honest. Yeah? Because it proves what he is decrypting now is actually, the content is actually what was given with the disclosure decision. So this can be verified. The complete procedure can be reviewed. If there are any discrepancies, they will be published and the officials impeached if they acted against the law. When that is done, it will be verified if the subscriber nonces were already bumped, and if not, the bumping or re-pseudonymization is initiated. So everything can be done. but it's not hidden, it's always open for public verification after some time. Now we have the complete process. Any questions to this process? Because now we make things a little bit more complicated. Okay. So what is if the delegates of civil society would have more power? For example, the freedom to deny a disclosure. Of course, there's a very tricky thing, because they will hamper an investigation. So that is not something they do easily. But again, consider our whatever gate scandal scenario. The delegates, for example, could say, well, we will not agree light-handed to this disclosure request, only if we can delegate 1 or 2 people into the investigation with supervising powers. Of course, these people would have been sworn to secrecy, and the investigators, for example, have the choice from which region they are coming. The delegates will represent a choice, let's say, of 12 people, and the investigators will choose 2 from which they assume they have nothing to do with the investigation. Or they want a guarantee that there's a suspicion that the investigation is related to whatever gate is wrong. And they want this in form of a sworn guarantee, which could be sued in the court if broken. So there are a lot of possibilities. We could also imagine that the delegates are elected for privacy manifestos. So a delegate says, that is my stance on disclosure. I have a manifesto. And perhaps he has an algorithmic defined manifesto for the speed of decision. And he gets a voting weight according to the voting percentages he got for his manifesto. Or an alternative would be that we not only have an examining magistrate, but examining jurors or assessors. That depends in which legal framework you are thinking. Again, these are sworn to secrecy, but they would be part of and have the point of view of the examining magistrate. So much more information to make their decision. Now, for something like this to work, you would need some kind of quorum decision. That is a number T out of the n delegates have to agree with the disclosure. And there are mechanisms for this, not my invention, secret sharing or split key schemes. A very simple approach, for example, for 2 to 3 quorum is what I have sketched here. Have an outer shell for one of the participants and the inner shell for the other 2. And then you can control that only when 2/3 agree, the inner key is accessible. There are much more elaborated schemes, Shamir, for example, which is a perfect secrecy. That is, if the threshold is not met, there is no information whatsoever about the key. There's Blakely, which is working with hyperplanes, which leaks information, that is, which each delegate agreeing to disclosure, the search space for the key becomes smaller. And actually, that could be a desirable construction. We will see later. Because in real world, in our world, we are accustomed to do 0-1 decisions, black and white, no shades of gray. But in the real world, decisions are normally made in shades of gray in much more than 50. And the question is, can we model that? especially can we model what typically happens in real life, that you show reluctance or renitency to coerce the other party to change behavior. So that is the idea. We take random bits. We have a key derivation function where we derive to our key. We use a deliberate amount of stretching. Then we calculate an error-correcting code for our random bits and distribute the error-corrected code bits to our parties, depending on their voting power. Encrypt it with the party's key. Now, the first delegate will not disclose his key part. Well, actually, each delegate can decide, and that makes for very, very different mathematical consequences, if he discloses nothing at all, part of his share or his complete share. And if he discloses part of the share, he can decide if he discloses which bit positions he did disclose or not. And that leads to interesting things. As long as the signs are wrong, sorry. As long as you have more than quorum bits, you have efficient key recovery. If you have less than quorum bits, if you have less than quorum bits denied, then you have efficient key recovery. If you have more than quorum bits denied, plus some margin, then you have so-called list decoding. That is, you have a small number of possible candidates, and the more bits beyond this quorum are denied, the more exponential time the brute forcing of the key becomes, to the degree that it's computationally not feasible anymore. And with this approach, I think we would have a graded denial which allows all the normal political instruments to be used to convince the investigators to behave in the way the society wants. Thank you for your attention.